Hey, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Star here. We are going to be taking a look at the golden age of Greece and hopefully taking a look at the information that you have on your chart. And if there's something you don't have, you should probably write that in on your chart to help you out here on your test eventually. All right, so we're going to start off by taking a look at art, one of our major areas of kind of this golden age idea. And so when we talk about Greek art, we have four major principles to look at when we talk about Greek art. All Greek art has something to do with these four things. Number one, they tended to glorify human beings. They made them look idealistic. They put them in these physically fit, toned kind of positions and made them look like they were extremely athletic. And so glorifying human beings is part of the art that we see of the Greek era. We also look at, they tended to symbolize the pride in their city-state, in some way showing some kind of way that that city-state looked impressive, or just kind of gave them the essence of that pride that they felt. We also see that they tend to express their belief in harmony, balance, order, and moderation. And then finally, we looked at it tended to combine beauty with usefulness. All right, we'll take a look at some examples here of what we have. There are a couple different styles of art that we see from ancient Greece. The first is architecture. When we take a look at the architecture of ancient Greece, you can see specifically here the architecture of the Parthenon. Obviously, shows pride in the city-state of Athens. So a lot of temples, gymnasiums, theaters that were built tended to show their pride in their city-state the way they were built. This one specifically we talked about already, the Acropolis, which is the Parthenon in Athens. And these Acropolis that we see up there tended to have these temples built right on top of the hilltops. This one specifically, the temple to Athena, the Parthenon. And then we look at kind of the architectural medium here. We look at the marble being used, in this case, to honor Athena, but these large pillars and columns that they use to kind of show pride in their city-state. And finally, it shows this perfection and balance that we talk about, these perfect proportions. All right, the symbol here of that Greek art and architecture. Next one we have is sculpture. There's quite a few sculptures still left behind. And when we look at sculptures, early Greek figures tended to look more stiff and unnatural. That's kind of the lower left there. But over time, we start to see that their ability to create more lifelike, realistic-looking statues happen. And so when we look at the other ones here, the one in the upper left-hand corner, the discus thrower, it's called Discobolos. That's a very famous one by the artist Myron. And you can see that the proportions of the body look realistic. They look mathematically correct. Right? And then finally, we look at Zeus. Both those statues on the right are of Zeus. All right, it's kind of showing the athletic toned bodies there. Again, the kind of idealized look. And finally, our last style of art that we tend to see in ancient Greece is paintings. And the only paintings we have left, for the most part, are on pottery. And so when we look at the pottery here, a lot of the other stuff has been lost or damaged, but you can see that what we have on the pottery has been preserved. And so you can see a lot of times we have this kind of black background or black paint of the pot, and then you've got these kind of golden paintings of everyday life. It tends to either involve some kind of myth or just a scene of everyday life that we see there. We're going to take a look at philosophy. So you actually have to scroll down a little bit on your chart and take a look at the bottom down there. We really have three philosophers that we really need to touch on, and you've already kind of watched a little bit of information and read some about yesterday as well. When we look at our philosophers, number one, Socrates is a big one. When we talk about Socrates, he believed that the education was the key to growth for everyone. And so that tended to get him into a little bit of trouble because he started to teach the young people of Athens to question everything and test everyone's values. And so that idea that he came up with where you should question things and test them, we know today as the Socratic method. But unfortunately got him in trouble because he was accused of corrupting the youth of Athens. Eventually he was found guilty and he was convicted and he was actually executed. He was forced to drink poison, which you saw a little bit in the video clip yesterday. But Socrates is kind of seen as the father of Western philosophy. And he gives birth to kind of these other philosophers that follow in his footsteps. All right. So if we take a look, one of his students that actually wrote everything down was named Plato. And Plato kind of continued on the works of his teacher, Socrates. And Plato eventually founded what he called the Academy, which was kind of a school that people could come all from different parts of Greece to experience the philosophy and the wisdom of Plato. And so Plato actually believed that perfection could never be achieved. It's something that he just thought couldn't happen. But the ironic thing is he also writes a book called The Republic, where he describes essentially the perfect world, the ideal world, which he obviously believed never could happen. But in that writing that he had called The Republic, he talked about the idea that rulers should be chosen not for their wisdom, for their wisdom, but not for their wealth. All right. So it doesn't matter how wealthy someone is or how powerful someone is, they should be wise if they are going to be a ruler. Obviously, in Plato's day, who would have been the wisest person in Greece? Most likely Plato. So he's kind of making the idea that he should be the one that should be chosen ruler. Okay. A lot of Plato's ideas revolve around government, education, justice, and religion. All right. So he tended to fall into those major four categories there. Plato also had a famous student, and that famous student, again, just like he did, wrote down what Plato did and continued on his work. And that famous student, is called Aristotle. And Aristotle, again, decided that everything could kind of be studied. We could figure things out. We could learn things just by using logic. He began to classify the species. And so anything that you've done with classification of species, like in science class, you can thank Aristotle for that work. All right. He also talks about government that should be a mixture of monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. And he talks about the best form of government. And a lot of his work revolves around scientific species and government work as well. All right. He also starts to look into the theory of an Earth-centered universe, which he was obviously wrong on, but he's the first person to put forth the idea that we were at the center of the universe. And unfortunately, that's not correct. All right, so getting into some of our other people we have here, we have our mathematicians. And so the guy on the top there, you should understand and know, I think, and his name is Pythagoras. He created the Pythagorean theorem, which is the theory of the right triangle. You guys know this one. You still use it today, and you probably used it in math class recently, I would imagine. All right, so Pythagoras creates the Pythagorean theory. We look at Euclid. Euclid is the famous Greek who basically his writings become the basis for geometry. All right, so a couple of very famous Athenians here. We look into science, and again, two famous scientists here coming out of Athens. We have Archimedes, who used physics to calculate the value of pi, 3.14. And then we look at some of the inventions that he had as well, the kind of simple inventions of the lever, the pulley system, and the screw. And when we talk about the screw, we're talking about not like the screw that you'd use to screw something in the wall with, although that's the basic idea, but he used the threads on a screw, and if you turned it, you were able to move something from a lower level to a higher level, and he used it specifically to move water. All right, so that's pretty important. Our other scientist we have here is Aristarchus, and he believed that the Earth and the planets traveled around the sun. So he was at odds with Aristotle a little bit with what he thought, but obviously Aristarchus kind of puts this idea of the Earth traveling around the sun out there. When we talk about medicine, we talk about Hippocrates, often found as the father of modern medicine, or known as the father of modern medicine. The Greeks in general just excelled in medicine, and Hippocrates was the kind of the father of all of this. He wrote 60 to 70 different medical studies while he was alive. He studied diseases and he searched for cures, and we still today take what we call the Hippocratic Oath. All right, the doctors that are out there still do take that. And so that's going back to the idea that he is kind of the father of modern Western medicine. When we talk about history, we have a couple of people here too. The first here we have is Herodotus. He's considered to be the first Western historian. He traveled around. He traveled to Babylon, Persia, Egypt, a lot of different places we've already talked about here in class. And he wrote down the history of those people. And he noted that if he saw it or if he got the information from someone else. So this is the first time we see the idea of like a primary source versus a secondary source. He was the primary source if he saw it. Obviously, if he's getting it from someone else who saw it, then it would be a secondary source. All right. The other person we have here down at the bottom here is Thucydides. Thucydides wrote the history of the Peloponnesian War. And so he wrote down everything that happened between Athens and Sparta. And he felt that it was really important for us to study the past so that we could help understand our nature, human nature in the future. We also have theater, and so we kind of divide theater up a little bit. We have three different areas when we look at theater here. The first is drama. All right, dramas were plays that obviously contain some kind of conflict and emotion. They were performed in these kind of the grand theaters, like what you see in the picture there, and performers typically wore masks. And then there was always a chorus of people too that kind of told the story. They were kind of like a narrator that kind of sang the story as they went through it. But drama was the very first theater. And over time, we start to see theater break into different kind of genres as well. And so after the idea of dramas, we get into specifically tragedies. And so when we talk about tragedies, we're talking about a play in which there's a character that struggles against the fate and the events going on in their life. And there are two really famous playwrights and plays here that you have to have written in. And the first is Sophocles. And Sophocles wrote the play Oedipus Rex. And Oedipus Rex is about a man who unknowingly marries his mother and kills his father. All right, and there's a whole long story there, but basically what happens is he is cast aside as a young baby because a soothsayer comes and tells his father that this is what's going to happen, and so he's thrown in the wilderness to die. But another couple come along him in the wilderness. They find him, they save him, they bring him home, and then when he becomes of age, when he's 18 years old, he finds out that he is supposed to kill his father and marry his mother, and so he leaves home. He doesn't want to do that, obviously, and along his travels, his trips, he ends up getting into an argument with a man in the forest, and he kills him. And then he goes on to where that man was from, and he ends up marrying his widow. And it turns out that man he killed was actually his real father, and the woman he now is married to is his actual mother. All right, so that is the tragedy here. Eventually, he ends up gouging his own eyes out because he is so distraught at what he did. All right, so the tragedy of Oedipus Rex. And we look at the other one, and that's Euripides is the writer there. Euripides wrote a tragedy talking about the Trojan women and how they describe the tragedies of war. And so that's a big one that you should know as well. The other type of theater that we see created at this time is comedies. And obviously these are plays that make fun of people or ideas, a lot of satire when we look at ancient Greece. And the person you should know here, the playwright you should know, is named Aristophanes. Aristophanes was known for his really sharp wit, and he wrote two really popular or really at the time important plays for comedies here. He wrote one called Clouds, and in that play he actually poked fun of and made fun of Socrates and all the theories that Socrates had. And the other one was called Lysistrata, and in that he poked fun at Athenian customs and behaviors.